I start every oil change that I do on every bike that I work on with running the bike until it is warm. Sometimes if the weather allows, I'll actually ride the bike until it's all the way up to temperature. In this case, I just let the bike idle for about 15 minutes. The next step after warming up the bike is I'm going to check for some jack points on the bike. I want to get this bike straight and level so that I can check the oil properly, also so that I can refill the oil and get it to its proper point later on in this job. I'm also checking for where exactly the drain bolt is before I throw a jack underneath it and jack the bike up. The jack itself is well out of the way of the drain plug, however it is right underneath the oil filter. The plan here is to drain the oil, then drop the bike off of the jack. Once the jack has been removed for the first time, I'll remove the oil filter and then replace it. The last part here of jacking the bike up is I'm just double checking, triple checking, making sure that it's not picking the bike up by the engine cases or any other fragile parts. Here I'm just digging around in my toolbox and going and grabbing my stool, getting ready to drain the oil out of this bike. First we need to check the oil, which is what I'm doing here. Here I'm just checking the current oil level. It's full, so there's nothing to worry about as far as this bike draining, leaking, or burning any of its oil. It retains all of its oil between oil changes, so we're in good shape here. This bike is equipped with a dipstick. You could see me flash it there right in front of the seat a second or two ago. I'm just checking, triple checking the oil level. The oil level is full, so we are good to go ahead and change this bike's oil. The next step is to get a 17mm wrench for the oil drain bolt and a drain pan to drain all of the used oil into. It's time to drain the oil, people. Start by loosening up the drain bolt with a 17mm wrench, then remove the bolt by hand, being careful not to drop it or the gasket washer into the used oil. Then set the bolt aside and let the oil drain. Now is a good time to wipe your hands off with some paper towels because you've surely gotten them oily. So yeah, get some paper towels, wipe your hands off. Contemplate life while the oil drains into the oil drain pan. Stare into the abyss of the oil drain pan and its oily, shiny goopiness. Do whatever you want to do for the next couple minutes. We're just draining oil. You're going to pick up with me here in a second or two. We are going to replace the drain bolt, tighten it up, and then remove the oil drain pan from the bike. After we do that, we're going to wind up dropping the bike off of the jack and going after the oil filter. look closely at the bottom of the bike here, I am just tightening up the oil drain bolt. Once we have the oil drain bolt tightened, I'll go ahead and drop the bike off of the jack and we'll go after the oil filter. If you look at the kickstand here, you can see that the kickstand is not in its fully out position, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and flip it over by hand. See, I knew exactly where the kickstand was because I put it up against the jack to give myself a little bit more room to work around it earlier. So now I'm just replacing it before I lean the bike back over. Leaning the bike over to the left onto the kickstand makes it easy to access the oil filter on these VT750 Shadows. The next step is to remove the oil filter. Start by loosening it up. You might be able to loosen it up by hand. Here I am just trying by hand to loosen up the oil filter. You might get lucky and it might just pop loose by hand. However, if you don't get lucky, you can use a set of normal automotive filter pliers to get a hold of the filter and apply enough torque to get it to spin in the counterclockwise direction. I've gone ahead and popped a set of normal automotive filter pliers out of my toolbox here, and that's going to allow me to loosen up the oil filter from the right side of the bike. Go ahead and spin it off and let it drain into the oil pan. Once it's drained, then you can go ahead and replace the oil filter before moving on to the next steps. It's almost time to replace the oil filter, so I've just stood up and I'm going to go and grab a brand new HF204 oil filter out of my van. That's what we're replacing this factory oil filter with. This bike has very few miles on it, so I'm kind of curious as to whether or not this filter is the factory filter or not. Who knows? This might be this bike's first oil change, believe it or not, y'all. I'm just kidding. I think it's probably had a couple of oil changes prior to this. It's just people probably use the factory Honda filters, whereas I am using a high flow filter. I'm just spinning that high flow filter on right now. Once I have the oil filter on, we're going to go ahead and dispose of this oil. You're not going to be able to see me do that. I'm going to end up doing it kind of behind the tire, the rear tire there. You won't be able to see that, so just bear with me. It'll be like watching paint dry for a couple of minutes. Because I'm mobile, containers and storage are always kind of a problem. Sometimes I use a 5-gallon jug for disposing of used oil. I actually have 2 5-gallon jugs in my garage right now that are about full of used oil and used gasoline. I try to dilute the gasoline down to where it looks mostly like oil before I go taking it down to the local auto parts store and disposing of it like that. I usually do it 5 gallons at a time. In this case, I'm draining all of the used oil into a used oil container. So just an empty oil jug that I had laying around in my van. I actually go through a lot of oil because I do a lot of oil changes on all kinds of bikes, late model bikes, old bikes, bikes that I've been working on, project bikes, all kinds of bikes get all kinds of oil changes. So you can see me disposing of the used oil right there. It'll end up at the local auto parts store before too long. Don't worry, I don't pour it down the local river or anything. That would be absolutely ridiculous and a stupid thing to do. There's no way in hell I would ever do that. So rest assured, all the oil gets disposed of properly when I drain it out of your bike. The next step is to put the bike back up on the jack, make it straight and level, and then fill the oil level up to the full mark. So there's kind of a debate, or there's something that new mechanics like to do, which is measure out the exact capacity based on what they read in a book or online or in a manual or whatever, and then to pour that directly into the engine. Don't do that. You're much better off just pouring it piecemeal, pouring it half a quart at a time, and then checking it, double checking, rechecking to make sure that the oil level is where it should be. And then once the oil level is where it should be at the top of the marks, then you go ahead and you start the bike. It'll fill up the oil filter, and then you can go ahead and shut the bike off and recheck the oil, and it should be a little bit lower than when you started. And then you just refill it to the top mark, put the dipstick back in, or put the oil drain plug, not drain plug, but fill plug back in, and call it a frickin' day. Now this is a kind of a long and drawn out process. This bike has a dipstick, not a window, so I'm gonna have to repeatedly check the dipstick. We're replacing the oil with Rotella 5W40. That's a perfectly good oil. The T6, the full synthetic product, works great in all kinds of motorcycles. Your motorcycle might call for a 10W40 oil. I assure you that 5W40 is just fine, especially if you live in a colder climate or somewhere where it doesn't get super hot, like here in Colorado. So the 5W is just the number when the oil is cold. The 40 is the number when the oil is hot. So basically a 5W40 and a 10W40 are pretty much the same oil once the oil gets hot. So here you're watching me. If you're still watching, thank you. This is probably like watching paint dry, but I'm just slowly pouring the oil into the bike until it is up to the full mark, and then I'll start the bike, recheck the oil, and fill it back up to the full mark. The last step is to just make sure that the bike is all the way full of oil, so filling it all the way up to the top after starting it. And then the very last step to this oil change is going to be to air up the front and rear tires. To do that, I'm going to wind up firing up my van, starting its air compressor, then I'll get my air tire gauge, my tire air gauge, my air gauge, my tire pressure gauge out, and then I'll check the tire pressures on the front and rear. I'm actually going to take it off of the jack right now so that I can roll the bike back and forth, so that I can expose the valve stems so that I can actually get to them. Believe it or not, airing up tires on a motorcycle is not always a trivial experience. Sometimes you have to roll the bike back and forth to get the Schrader valves exposed to where you can actually fill them with air. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and fill the front tire up with air first. Well, actually second. I just filled up the rear tire, so here we're going to go after the front tire. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this video. I'm sorry if a whole lot of it was like watching paint dry, because, well, watching somebody change the oil on a Honda Shadow is a lot like watching somebody, you know, watching paint dry. Important things to remember are to check the oil before you drain it. Make sure that you can remove the drain plug or the fill plug before you go and drain it, because if you drain it and then you can't actually fill it, that's going to be a huge problem. Use common sense. If you've done it on a car, you can probably do it on a bike. It's not that hard. The oil filter and the drain plug are both extremely accessible on this bike.